Hello, BookTube. This is Mike Frost, the postmodern poetry prognosticator. Today I thought we'd do a little something different on the channel. I've been watching with curiosity three different booktubers who have recently done videos on the Bible as a literary work. I don't know who started it, but Jason Francis Burton, his channel, he's doing videos. He's calling it the Apocryphal April. I'll leave a link to his channel below, but he's doing some more videos on the apocryphal books of the Bible, or books that have not made it into the Bible, I guess is a better way to put that. But also Jason over at Old Blues Chapter and Verse. He did a video recently on one of the books in Genesis, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, which Steve Donoghue followed up with his own video. They both used different versions of the Bible. I believe Jason used a Catholic version of the Bible, and Steve used the King James version of the Bible. I'm going to follow up on those sorts of videos because I do like the Bible as a literary work. None of these channels are doing an exegesis of the text. They're just treating it as a literary work and discussing it from a literary standpoint, which is something that I can get behind. But I think that between Jason and Steve, they did a pretty thorough looking at the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So because I'm interested in the work as well, I thought I would just start with the beginning and go to Genesis 1. If I'm going to add to this conversation, I thought I would at least begin from the beginning. So today I thought we would take a look from a literary standpoint and from a poet's view on Genesis chapter 1. So for those that may not be familiar with the Bible, I'm going to read the text. It goes, the story of creation, which is Genesis 1, goes into Genesis chapter 2, the first couple of verses of Genesis chapter 2. So the first thing we should understand is when the Bible was written, when these works were compiled, there were no chapters and verses. Those things are something that later on got added to the text. So the fact that a story might go from one chapter and into a small part of another chapter should not be considered unusual, because none of these things were written in chapters. They were just written in story. They were stories told first and then written, but no numbered verses or any of that was ever a part of the original text. So, but as a reminder, so that we can start, I thought I would just start by reading Genesis chapter 1 and a couple of verses into chapter 2 so that we can get the Genesis story, the beginning, the creation story. And I like Steve. I prefer the King James version of the Bible, so I'll be reading from the King James version of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the water, and let it divide the waters from the waters." And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth grass, and herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth." And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass, and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of heaven to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. He made the stars also. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of the heaven." And God created the great whales and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the seas, and let fowl multiply in the earth." And the evening and the morning were the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creepy thing, and the beast of the earth after his kind." And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth after his kind, and the cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every herb-bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. And to every beast in the earth, and to every fowl in the air, and to everything that creepeth upon the earth, wherein there is life, I have given every green herb for meat." And it was so. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And the evening and the morning were the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God ended his work which he had made, and he rested on the seventh day from all his works which he had made. And God blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because in it he had rested from all his work which God created and made. That's Genesis chapter 1, the creation story. Without exegeting the text, without trying to break it down into its religious meanings, there's some things that we have to understand from a modern standpoint. That often when folks now read this, they look at it from a modern standpoint, which with our minds of science, we try to think of this as, okay, so this is how God created the earth, in what order he created the earth, and when each part of the cosmos was created. And that is not the way it was originally intended. The mindset was so completely different that it's foreign to us now to understand what this text or any other creation story really, we're talking about ancient creation stories, be they Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek, you name it, all the original creation stories were compiled, put together, told in their original forms with a very different mentality. So to start to understand this as a piece of literature, we have to first understand what the creation storytellers, originators were trying to get across. And it was not our idea now of a scientific explanation for the creation of the universe. That's not what they were for. I'll kind of save what they're for after we kind of break this thing down. So, but the mentality is complete. Just start with the idea that the mentality is very different. So to understand, so the beginning of the text, so to understand what they're referring to when I say that in the beginning God created the heaven, singular, and the earth. All right, so the ancient Hebrews believed in three different types of heaven. There's the heaven that is God's throne. There is the heaven which would equate to what we would think of as space, where all the stars, the moon, the sun are put into the firmament. So a very different vision of what the universe looked like and what space was, but think of it as a layer in which all these stars, moons, planets are all held. And then the other heaven would be the sky, basically, where we see clouds. So there's three different types of heaven. So the original storytellers are saying God created the heaven, singular, and the earth. So that heaven we can get from the rest of the context and I'll get into each stage as we go. The heaven that is originally mentioned there is the throne of God, if you will. So the idea, the concept of God, which differed from a lot of the contemporary, at that time, contemporary origin stories, is there's in most other cultures, there was a multitude of gods. And each god had its own place in the creation story. Each god created a certain part or was responsible for a certain part. The idea here is that the Hebrew God is outside, above, and even omnipotent beyond even what is the throne of God. He created what the Jews and Christians and Muslims after them would think of as paradise. That's what the throne of God is. So he created that. He is outside of that and beyond that. So he creates that. That's the heaven that's mentioned in the first verse. That he created the heaven, is the throne of God, the paradise area, and the earth. And it's the earth that's without form and void, and darkness is upon the face of the deep. And when God said, "Let there be light," now, of course, he has not created the sun, the moon, the stars, any of this stuff. When God says that "let there be light," what he's essentially, the difference between light and darkness is a metaphorical difference. The difference between knowledge and, in this case, specifically in the Hebrew text, order. In the originating ideas of why these creation stories were put together, repeated, and put out there, was to explain the order of the universe. Who's in charge of what, and what one needs to do as a human to placate whatever god or gods might be in charge of this. So what the Hebrew originating stories were about was that one God, singular, created all of this. And it is that one God that's in control. That's why the stories were written, not to try to explain in a scientific fashion. So that original heaven, where he creates order and purpose, is the throne of God. That's from which the originating order and knowledge and structure is, and it has always been. It's matter, I'm going to use different terms now, but the earth where chaos reigned, that there was no structure, there was no order, there was no purpose. And it was God that said, "Let there be light," in that darkness, which was the chaos of pre-ordered existence. So in the idea that first couple of verses is about creating the two different types of heaven. The first one was the throne of God, where order has always reigned, according to these beliefs. And then the rest of existence was darkness. There was ignorance. There was non-purpose. So he lets the light into, he puts the world, the earth, the existence into order. That's the original. So that next structure is the secondary thing, which brings us to the structure of the story, really. So these are stories that are repeated, and often in these old stories, there's structures that help the storytellers remember the structure of the story so that they remember what happens when. And this story is no different from any other story, and we have repeated themes. If you think of these texts, okay, so you got 6 days of creation, right? The seventh day God rested, and we'll get back to that. But 6 days of creation, if you think of the numbers 1, 2, and 3, and then on the opposite side, 4, 5, and 6, you will see that the structure to help the storyteller remember these things is built off that structure. You got 1, 2, 3, the first day, second day, third day, then the fourth, fifth, sixth. So the first day equates to the fourth day, second day to the fifth day, third day to the sixth day. And let me show you how that works. So on the first day, he divides. So 1, 2, and 3 are all division. He's dividing things. On the first day, he divides the light from the darkness, right? So that's day 1. Day 2, he creates a firmament, which is basically a division between the waters that are above and the waters that are beneath. So on that first day, when he's created heaven, the throne of God, which is the place of order, then he divides the day from the light, which he's creating basically space. It's a different concept. It's not thought of it the way we think of space, but basically a firmament. That's where he's going to eventually put the stars and the planets. And then on the second day, he divides the firmament, the waters from above and waters below, which is sky, the water of the sky, and then the waters below. He hasn't divided the waters yet. That would be the third day, where he divides, basically pulls the waters together and creates dry land. So he's dividing the land from the waters. So first 3 days are about dividing the light from the darkness, first order from chaos, and then dividing the light from the darkness, as in the space of, he's put order into the universe, creating the space. And then on the third day, he divides the land from the waters. 3 days of division. Okay, so you got the first day where he creates the space. On the fourth day, so that the storyteller can remember this, he brings it in his mind, can bring it across. That's when God creates the sun, the moon, the stars, and he puts them in the firmament that he created in day 1. So that's where you get the light and all this. So from a scientific point of view, from our modern point of view, we're thinking, how does he have day 1, day 2, day 3 without a sun, the moon, stars? That makes no sense. It's not about making sense. It's about who's in charge, who created the order. The original listeners to these stories wouldn't be looking for a scientific explanation for our existence. They would be looking for the order of importance and who created them and to whom they owe their very existence. They're not thinking scientific measures. So you've got the creation of the sun, the moon, stars, and putting in the firmament to divide the day from the night, which of course he's already had 1, 2, 3 days. So this is the fourth day. Now he's dividing the day from the night in a physical sense. These divisions are about order and knowledge. That's the metaphor light. And then we get to the actual physical light. We get a day from the night. But the stars, the moon, and the sun are all put in there so that we understand order, to rule over and to give us order. That's why the suns, the moons, the stars, all that move in a certain order. It's all about, he put things in order. All right, so we had the first day where he divided light from darkness and created the heavens, and put the fourth day he puts the stars. On the second day he divides the waters below from the waters above, basically creating the sky and the seas. So he divides them this way. And then, of course, on the fifth day, so you had the first and the fourth, now the second and the fifth day. On the fifth day, he creates the fish and the fowl. So you have the division of the waters below and the sky above, and now you populate that water below with the fish and the sky above with the fowl. So that's the connection across that divide. On the third day, he separates the waters from the land, brings forth the land, and then he puts all the vegetation and stuff on the land. On the sixth day, he creates the creatures that move upon the land, the cattle, the beasts of the field, the anything that creepeth upon the land, all that. And then he puts man to have dominion over it, because man is in the likeness of God. God has dominion over all of creation in the storyteller's mind. He puts man to have dominion. That's why it's in the likeness of God. We have dominion over all the stuff that was created prior to. So that's your story structure. It's structured in a mnemonic sense so that you can remember where they're going. You got day 1, 2, 3 over here where you're dividing stuff. And then you got 4, 5, and 6 where you're populating those things. And on the seventh day, God rests. Now, this is not rest as in, okay, I did a lot of work, now I need to sit down and take a break. This is rest as in the sense of like when you're in the courts and defense or someone in the court says, I rest my case. It's the sense of completion. It's the completion. I rest my case because I'm finished making my case. So this is God resting his case because he is finished creating, not finished sustaining, because God, in this idea of Judaic, Christian, and even Islamic God is always sustaining. Everything is sustained by God. So he never stops working in a sense that he needs to take a break, needs to take a rest. He goes from creating, he rests his case because he has done the creation. Now his work is to sustain or to continue his plan of whatever the plan is. I guess that would depend on your whatever religion you follow in that, if you follow any at all. But from that point on, it's sustaining. It's not resting as in I need a break because I did a lot of work with this creation. It's I rest my case. I rest the process. The creation process is finished. Now my work is different. It also comes back to the idea of reigning. When in the ancient Hebrew culture, and it's very similar to the idea of our electoral system. I'm going to make a huge leap here, but follow me on this. In our electoral process, our president is elected on November 5th, 6th. And then he starts building his cabinet and putting everything in order so that he can take over in January. And then from January onward, he's called the president. Before that, he's the president-elect. He has not, I'm going to use a strange word here, but maybe in an era of Trump it works, but he's not reigning at that point. He's not the president. He's the president-elect. So God in this process has he created his throne, and then he created something to rule over. And then from the seventh day, he rests, as in you rest a book upon a shelf. That sort of, not rest, I'm tired, I got to finish this, but resting as in first and foremost, the meaning is I rest my case. I'm done building now. I've got a different task to do. The second part is this idea of resting as rest a book upon a shelf. I'm now sitting on the throne. I'm reigning from that point on. Now that I have a kingdom to reign or a creation to reign over, I've created my throne. I'm outside of that. I'm beyond that. I'm beyond even the concept of heaven and hell and creation. But I am going to now place myself upon that throne. And if we're following the Bible here in the King James Version, the concept from the Christian idea is to have someone sitting at the right hand on that throne. Judaic tradition and Islamic tradition would have that a different way, but that's essentially the way the literary process of this thing works, is that there is the idea that this is a scientific explanation for the beginning of time. It makes no sense. It's not what they would have been thinking at the time. So we have to when we take literature, we have to look at it from from a literary standpoint, what the original audience of that culture would have been. Their idea of like, if I were to flip a coin and head down, and we asked them, what are the odds that that is heads? Or what are the odds that that is tails? They would have no concept of what we were speaking of. They wouldn't have a mathematical mindset of creating odds. They wouldn't have done the experiment of flipping a coin 100 times to see how many times it landed on heads and how many times. There would have been no experimental mindset. If you asked them, they could have told you what God, if it's not a Christian, if we had a polytheistic, they would tell you what God determined whether that was heads or tails. And in case, I guess in this case, they'd say God decided whether that was going to be heads or tails. Or they could tell you what it meant for it to be heads or what it meant for it to be tails. But if you asked them the odds or the scientific process or the percentages, they'd have no idea what you were referring to. Same idea here. They don't think of this in the terms of scientific explanation for the creation of the universe. What they're thinking of is who created it and to whom do I owe that creation and what is my place in that creation, all of which is explained in that first chapter, beginning in the second chapter. The second chapter goes into the Adam and Eve, and if you see the divisions of days 1, 2, and 3, you understand how that goes right back into the division of man into man and woman. And they would not have seen a contradiction in those two stories. They would not, the idea that one story contradicted another would not have entered their minds. These stories were around for thousands and thousands of years. If they saw any contradiction, they would have addressed that. They would have put the Adam and Eve story in chapter 1. That's not the way the mindset worked. It was two completely different stories to explain two completely different processes, and for two different purposes. No contradiction, just two completely different purposes. Okay, so that's my walkthrough of Genesis chapter 1 to add to this conversation that Jason at Old Blues Chapter and Verse and Steve Donoghue have started in stellar fashion. But Steve invited us to do a Sunday school kind of thing and talking about the Bible as a literary work. And I thought I would just add my 2 cents worth, if it's worth even that. But that's my day. Thank you, BookTube. Thank you for watching.